My name is Charles Harrell. Today is June 21st, 2005. We're in Fredericksburg, Virginia, interviewing Mr. Creasy about his adventures and his episodes during the Korean War. For the record, Mr. Creasy, would you state your full name?
My name is Oscar Kenneth Creasy.
And where were you born?
I was born in Albemarle County, Virginia.
And when?
In 1933, August 3rd.
What branch of service did you enter?
I entered the Army Air Force, which was later the Air Force.
While you were in service?
While I was in service.
When did you enlist?
In January of 1952.
And when were you discharged?
I was discharged in January of 1956.
And what battalion or regiment or bomber group were you in?
Well, the first time in Korea in 1952, I was with the 49th Fighter Group, 8th Fighter Bomber Squadron.
How about the second time you were recruited?
Now, the second time, I was with the 8th Fighter Bomber Wing, 35th Fighter Bomber Squadron. We were known as the Black Panthers.
The 35th?
Fighter Bomber Squadron.
And the Black Panthers?
Black Panthers.
Did you have a nickname when you were in the first one?
We did, but I cannot remember it.
What was your highest rank you attained while you were in the...
Airman second class.
Were you an airman second class when you went to Korea the first time?
No, I was airman third class.
But by the second time you went?
No, I got promoted. The second time I went back was when I got promoted to airman second class.
What war did you serve in?
The Korean War.
And can you tell me the location that you were based in?
My first time I was based at Daegu, K2, Korea.
How about the second time?
The second time I was at K13, Suwon. And then from there, they moved my whole wing, the 8th Fighter Bomber Wing. We moved back to Itazuki Air Force Base, Japan.
Were you ever wounded?
I was at Daegu.
What date were you wounded?
October the 13th, 1952.
Were you ever a prisoner of war?
No.
Mr. Creasy, I'd like for you to remember back to your earliest memories during the Great Depression. I realize you were a child born in 1933, but at the end of the Great Depression, you might have some memories. What do you remember about the Great Depression?
I remember quite a bit about it because I was raised on a little farm. I had two brothers and 4 sisters. And my oldest brother's 15 years older than I am, and so I had to grow up with 4 sisters that was older than myself, so life was kind of hard growing up with 4 girls. I used to get in trouble with them, and they'd get mad at me or something. They'd go to slap me, and I'd shut my eyes like this, because I figured if they can't see me, if I can't see them, they can't see me, so they can't hit me.
Can you tell me about your parents?
Yes, my mother and dad, my mother was 16 when she was married.
What was her name?
Mary Lucy Rhodes. And my father's name was Melvin. He did not have a middle name. And he was born in 1889, and my mother was born in 1898. And my mother was born in Fluvanna County, and my father was born in Albemarle County.
And your dad was a farmer?
He started out as a railroader in Williamsburg, Virginia. And they told him he had to join a union. And he says, union be damned. He quit and went back to the farm. He didn't care for a union.
Was he born also in Albemarle County?
He was, yes, sir.
But he was in Williamsburg, Virginia,
At
being a
the time,
railroader.
yes.
So he moved back. When he moved back, is that when he met your mother?
No, they were married when he was living in Williamsburg. She used to go to the old Bruden Parish church there in Williamsburg.
Do you recall when he moved back? I know you weren't around yet.
Let's see. I'd say my brother was born in 1918, so he must have moved back somewhere around 1916, 1917.
And so when you were growing up, he was a farmer.
He was a farmer, yes.
What did he farm?
We had a little, I guess you'd call it a truck farm, because we raised a little bit of everything. We raised wheat, corn, barley, and our vegetables and things. And you was asking about the end of the Great Depression. Well, back then, times were pretty tough. And money was hard to come by, so my dad used to make moonshine. That's how he'd get money to put clothing and stuff on the kids' backs and all. But we were rich. When I say we were rich, we raised all of our food and canned it and everything. And we gave away a lot of food and stuff to people that was less fortunate than us.
When your dad got money, did he also sell his crops, or was that a pretty much
he did. Well, what he did with his crops mostly was he'd raise a couple of hogs, or he'd raise a couple of calves and things, and that's what he would sell. But as for the crops themselves, the corn and wheat and stuff, he used the wheat mostly for our own consumption. In other words, we'd make our own flour and grind grain and stuff to feed the livestock with.
Did you have a mill on your farm?
No, sir. We used to carry it to Gordonsville, to the mill.
Do you recall going to Gordonsville?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I used to enjoy that. Looked forward to it, because back in those days and times, didn't get to go to town that often. So when we would take a grain and stuff to the mill, that was a big outing. I really enjoyed that, and I loved watching that mill work.
Did you get to ride in a car or a truck to go there?
Truck.
Do you ever recall not having a vehicle?
Well, my family, the first vehicle that was in my family was my oldest brother. When he was in the CC camps, that Roosevelt started. Well, that was the first vehicle. It was an old Model A convertible, and he came home one weekend on furlough, leave, or whatever you want to call it. And when he was going back, he fell asleep and ran off of the road and almost killed him. He was there, I think, something like about 8 hours before they found him, and he had almost bled to death.
What was his name?
James Lewis.
Your family was hit by the Great Depression. Did they lose their
No, sir, we
property?
didn't lose the farm. We were able to hang on to our farm. Lost now you're saying the family, now this was my grandparents, but they lost all of the money they had. They didn't lose their farm, but they had some money, and they lost all of that in the Great Depression.
But your dad owned his farm.
Yes, he bought it from my grandfather. In other words, my grandfather, my uncle, and my dad bought their farms from my grandfather.
Did your older brother go to the CCC camp because he had no work?
Well, they had work, but the CC camp paid more and provided him a better security.
Did your father also get government work?
No, Dad stayed on the farm, and like I said, he used to make moonshine to supplement the income. And I remember when he was making his moonshine, was a little fella. I always had to wash gallon jugs, half-gallon jars, pint bottles in the creek. I'd take them down and put sand in them and shake them and wash them. And then I'd have to help him cut the wood for the still, which was dead wood, because it didn't give off the odor and the smoke that green wood would. And then I'd shell the corn and had to run it through the corn cracker. But I never, ever got to go to the still. My dad never let me. My oldest brother did. He'd work with Dad to make the moonshine, but I never got to. So to this day, I don't know what a still looks like.
How far do you think it would have been from your house?
The still?
Yeah.
Oh, well, different places where he'd hide it, anywhere from, say, maybe a half mile to a mile and a half.
So he moved it around.
Yes, sir.
It was still illegal to make
It was.
moonshine at the time?
Yes, sir.
Did he drink a lot of all of the moonshine
Nope.
also?
Nope. He didn't drink it. He made it and sold it. And the way he would sell it, he would hide it different places and different sizes. A gallon, a half gallon, pint, quart, whatever. And when the men would come to buy it from him, he'd ask them what they wanted. And they'd pay him. And he'd say, now you go over here to this tree, or you go over to that stump, or this rock. He never touched it, you know what I mean, in case it was revenue.
The Great Depression gets worse and then better and then worse again. And then finally the mess in Europe starts with Hitler taking over country after country. I realize you're a still young man. We're not involved in a war. Had you heard of Adolf Hitler before the war started?
No, not that I recall. No, sir. From a CC camp, my oldest brother,
What's his name?
James,
Right.
was, I can't remember if he enlisted or if he was drafted in the Army. And he was at Goodfellow Field, Texas. And he was coming home on leave on December the 7th, 1941, when Pearl Harbor was bombed.
Do you recall that day?
Yes, sir, I do.
How did you hear about the news?
Radio. And he was home. He was coming home on leave, and they told him all, to report back. And I remember my mother, when she heard the news, she broke down and cried.
Did your brother have to leave within a day?
No, his wife was with him, and they had a young son. His name was Eddie O'Hare Creasy. And so he packed her up in a car and sent her back home.
Where was he living at the time?
He was shipping out.
Where did he go? Did he go to Europe or Japan?
He went to England. He was stationed in England. He was with the 310th Ferrying Squadron. He was a supply sergeant. And he was on the same base there that the Memphis Belle was.
So he was with the 8th Air Force.
Yes.
Did he write you any during the war?
Oh, yes.
I realize there were lots of censoring, but were you able to read anything in his letters that told about what he was doing? Did you write him?
Yeah. As much as a kid would, I'd write him and tell him what I was doing and whatnot.
Just use regular mail when you did it, or V-mail?
It was female. It was female. And only one time do I remember that my mother got a letter from him that there was parts of it that had been, censored and chopped out.
As the war progressed and we started winning battles, do you recall reading those in the newspaper or the radio?
I tell you what I remember most about the Second World War was the pictures on the cover of the Saturday Evening Post and Life magazine of the Holocaust and the bodies and things is the biggest thing I remember. As far as the battles and things like, we hear on the news today of the boys being killed and all, no, I don't remember too much of that.
Did your home have electricity in it ever since you can remember?
No, sir. No, we did not get electricity on the farm down there until 1950.
What was life like living on a farm without electricity?
Well, if you hadn't never had it, you didn't miss it. And we used the old kerosene lamps and lanterns and things, but as far as electricity, we never had it, so it was we never missed it. I do remember a farm just down below us, and that was before they even started running electric lines. They had they called it a Delco. It had their basement was full of batteries, and they had a generator that they would run to charge those batteries up. But that was first time I ever recall seeing electricity.
Your radio, was it run by
About a big old battery, about so big.
What else did you listen to the radio to listen for?
Well,
was there any entertainment shows?
Yeah, we used to listen to the Grand Ole Opry, and that was on Saturday night. That was kind of the big thing. But I used to love to listen to the Lone Ranger when I'd get a chance. I got in more trouble than enough because I'd sneak in and turn the radio down real low and get my ear right up in next to it so I could hear it, so nobody else would know I was in there listening to it. And mom or dad or somebody, I'd supposed to be doing chores, but I'd be sitting in there listening to the Lone Ranger.
During the war, did your dad have any input in the war effort?
They used to have tin can drives. I don't know if you ever heard of them or anything, but back then the tin cans, not like they are now, and you'd have to clean them, make sure they weren't rusty or anything. You cut the tops and bottoms out of them, and then you'd slip those inside and you'd flatten them out. And we used to have big tin can drives, and used to buy the savings bonds.
Did you buy savings bonds?
I
with
did.
Your money?
Used to. They had, you could buy a 10-cent stamp or a 25-cent stamp, and you'd pay $18.75 for a $25 maturity bond, and that's what we used to do.
Do you recall your first bond that you got?
I never got one. I got up to, I guess it was about $16 and something, and what the heck was it I had to have? I had to have, I had to have my tonsils taken out. And so it took my $16 and some cents to get my tonsils taken out.
While you were on that farm, you mentioned you had tin can drives. Did you get paid for the tin cans? That you
No, sir. They were all volunteer.
Did you participate in the rubber drives?
No, because we didn't have, there was no rubber or anything at that time. We had the ration books and stamps and things that while my sister-in-law had gotten back home, I told you, and so she had the car, and she'd get her gasoline stamps, and for the rubber you can only buy, I believe it was one tire a year or something like that. So you had to really treat everything gently.
When the war ended in Europe, VE Day in May of 1945, do you recall that day?
Yes, sir.
Where were you?
Let me see now.
Your brother was still in Europe?
He was still over there, yes, sir. He didn't get back home until about 3 months later. By the time, they shipped him back and he got processed and everything. But let me see. I can't remember just where I was when they signed. Germany surrendered.
How about when Japan surrendered and the war was officially over throughout the world?
Oh, golly, you are taxing the memory. I can't tell you exactly where I was or what I was doing, but I do remember them.
As the war ended and your brother came home, do you remember the day he came home?
Yes, sir.
What did you do?
One of my oldest sisters used to stay with my grandmother, and this particular night she had a date, and so they sent me up there to stay with my grandmother, and I didn't want to go because they thought that was when my brother would be getting home, but they didn't know for sure. So I went, and so when I came home the next morning, he was at home in the bed.
Did you do what a typical 12-year-old would do, go wake him up?
I did indeed. Jumped in the bed with him. And it was so good to see him.
Did your parents throw a big party for him when he got home?
That I don't remember.
Don't remember.
No, sir.
So World War II is over and you missed it.
Yep.
Had you dreamed of being a soldier?
Always. I had always dreamed of being a soldier.
Was your father in First War?
No. No. I had some great uncles that was in World War One. That one of them was gassed, and the other one he I guess you'd say shell shocked or whatever, because his state of mind was not of the best. I mean, but
did they talk about the war to you?
No.
How about your brother?
No, he didn't. Now I have a brother-in-law that married one of my sisters, and I'm one of the few people that he will sit down and talk to about his experiences.
Was that when you were older, though, or was that when you were 15?
No, that's since I came back from Korea. That was after my service.
So here you are, a young man who missed the war that maybe he wanted to have been a soldier in. Were you going to school at the time?
I was. I went to, my first school was a little one-room country school. And let's see, there was four of us, all going to that same school. Myself and three of my sisters going to this little one-room country school. And then two of the girls, they moved up, their classes moved up, so they went to the upper school, and my youngest sister and I went to the little country school together. And I think her and I fought almost as much in school as we did at home.
What was her name?
Matilda. And she always wanted to be a school teacher. She used to bug me to death. She'd get the books and things, and she'd make me sit down because she was going to teach me my IDCs. Not ABCs, but IDCs as a little fella. And she wound up being a school teacher, and she retired from teaching school in Newport News, Virginia.
Between the end of World War II, when you were only about 12 or 13 years old, and the beginning of Korea, which would put you about 17 years old, what did your family do? What did you do?
I was in high school, and I was playing football, and I wasn't the best of student.
What's the name of your high school?
Fluvanna County High School. And I guess you'd say I was a lazy student because my grades were not of the best. And the last year I played football, I don't know why or what, but after the football season was over with, I just decided this is it. So I went and talked with the Air Force recruiter, and went in the Air Force.
So you were 17?
Yes.
So and you hadn't finished
I
high
had
school?
not finished high school.
How far did you get?
I was sophomore.
Sophomore.
Yeah.
So football was your sport?
It was my sport, yes.
Was there any subjects that you sort of enjoyed while you were in high school?
I loved math and I loved science. I really enjoyed science. And I tell you, to this day, I despised it, but I wished I'd have paid more attention to it, ancient history. Because you look back on the world today, and we are fast living the rise and fall of the Roman Empire.
As you were decided to go talk to the recruiter to join the Air Force, was there any economic idea?
Well, when I went in the Air Force, I signed up and got a Class Q allotment from my dad.
What's that mean?
You put up so much money, and then the military will double it. So I put up half of my pay, which was $42 a month, and then the government doubled it, and that's what my dad got the 4 years I was in service.
Did he need that money?
Yes and no. We were doing, the farm and everything. We were doing fine, but the money helped.
Was he still running the still at the time?
No, sir. He'd give the still up then. He done got a little bit too old for that. And we bought my grandmother's old farm. She had fell at 93 and broke her hip. And they thought she was going to pass away. So my oldest brother and I bought her farm. And that
was going to kill you when she found out you talked about the still.
Okay. What were you talking about?
Let's see, what were we?
Talk about grandparents?
Oh, and they thought she was going to die, and so they wanted to get the farm squared away. And the way my grandfather had left it, she had lifetime rights to the farm, but the farm itself was left to him and his heirs. So we bought it. And that's what my dad did with part of that money. That Class Q allotment was paid the farm off.
Okay. You decided to join the military, but why the Air Force versus the Army?
Because my oldest brother was Air Force. Guess you'd say I was following in his footsteps. Had he been a Marine, I probably would have been a Marine. Had he been a Navy man, I'd probably been Navy. But that's why I went to Air Force, was because he was Air Force.
You joined after the Korean War had started. Did you have fears of war?
I had fear of being drafted. I didn't want to go in the Army. That was one of the reasons why I went and joined the Air Force.
Some of the battles that were fought in Korea, had you looked into any of those?
I had heard about them. I had heard about the Chosin Reservoir, how our boys were massacred up there and whatnot, yes. And how we were pushed back by the North Koreans, and we had to battle so hard to hold part of the ground. Now, when I went into Korea, I went in there where we had the last stand there at Daegu. Was one of the last Air Force bases that we had control of.
Tell me what your mother felt like when she heard you were joining the military.
Same thing as when my oldest brother was in service. She didn't want me to go. I mean, you know how all mothers are. They don't want their sons to be in harm's way.
But she let you, even though you weren't
Yes.
18.
Yes.
Where did you have to report when you first joined?
Went to Alexandria and was sworn in there, and then we flew to San Antonio, Lackland Air Force Base in Texas.
How was the first day that you were on the at boot camp for you?
It was a long day because we got up about 4:30 and they carried us to the airport there in Washington, and then they flew us to Texas, and we got down to San Antonio about 10 o'clock at night, and we were all hungry, and the only thing that they had to feed us or they could prepare for us was a breakfast, scrambled eggs, but it sure did taste good.
How about the physical training?
It was very tough, but it wasn't anything, I don't think, quite the rigorous training and stuff that the Army and the Marines went through.
So it wasn't an impossible feat for you?
No, sir.
Were you physically fit, 100%?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I could do anything that was demanded of me or required and whatnot.
During World War II, a lot of vets I've talked to talk about the rigorous amount of shots and medical exams they had to go through.
Oh, yes, sir. Same thing. And, well, when I first got down to Lackland, the boys that had been there, say 3 weeks, a month or so and all, we was called what they call a rainbow flight. That was because we were still in civilian clothes and everything. And so every time we'd go marching by these that had been there a while, they would always sing the old song, "You'll be sorry." And then when you'd go to get your shots and off and everything, there's some of those, a couple of them made me right sick. I don't know if it was a tetanus or just what they were, but and that was one. I think it was a tetanus shot. That when they give it to you, I'll tell you the truth, it felt like your arm was going to fall off.
Were you hospitalized?
No, we kept going, all of us. But it was funny because the man in front of you, they were still using the old steel needles that they'd sharpened. And every once in a while they'd get a burr on them or something, and the guy in front of you, when the medic would hit it and pull the syringe back, the needle would still be hanging in his arm. So he'd pull that needle out with his fingers and pick up another one because all of the medication and stuff would come running out. So he'd have to get another shot.
But that didn't happen to you?
No, I was lucky.
How long did your boot camp last?
12 weeks.
And during that time, what was the most challenging moment? Do you recall?
The most challenging moment was on the firing range. I don't know. I took it as a challenge or an honor to make expert on the firing range. In being an old country boy, it was a goal for me.
Had you shot guns before?
Yes, sir. But that was the most challenging thing for me.
Did you achieve it?
Yes, I did. I made my expert.
What weapon did you use?
M1 carbine. It's a 30 caliber. And from San Antonio, Texas, we took a series of tests and stuff, to figure out which you'd be best adapted for. And I wound up at Lowry Air Force Base, Denver, Colorado, in the armament, the needs of the Air Force, because at that time that's what they put me in, and that was 8 weeks of schooling.
What had you hoped to be when you went into the Air Force? What did you want to be?
I wanted to be a mechanic, to work on the plane. Well, I worked on the plane, but it wasn't the actual job. I wanted to be the, I guess you'd call it the crew chief. I really wanted to fly is what I wanted to do. But I was like my oldest brother. I had, what do you call it, vertigo or whatever it is, where you'd black out, under certain conditions. and so that's what I wound up doing, working on the ground.
At Lowry Air Force Base, did you make any friends?
Oh yes, we had. Well, I tell you the job that I had out there. I used to work with my dad firing an old sawmill boiler, and so I learned how to bank the fire and stuff. And so while I was waiting to get into school, for the new class to begin, they needed firemen for the furnaces out there. So I volunteered for it because you'd work 24 hours and you'd be off 48. And you didn't have to worry about pulling any KP or anything. So I could, and it was easy for me because my dad had, I'd learned from my dad had a bank of fire, and I'd take that coal and put it in that old furnace, and I'd only have to make about 3 rounds out of a 24-hour shift, where all of the other fellows that was doing it, everybody was raising heck because their barracks was cold and everything else. And the ones that I had 4 barracks that I had to take care of, and all of mine was just nice and toasty warm.
How was the schooling in armament school for you?
It was kind of tough in as much as I didn't know anything about electricity, and we had to learn circuitry and whatnot for the aircraft, and that's was the tough part on me. As far as the weapon itself, the mechanics and all, I was able to handle that and do real well with it.
How many different weapons did you have to learn about?
Let's see, we had the 50 caliber machine gun, the 20 millimeter cannon, the 45, and the M1 rifle, and the carbine.
But on the airplanes?
On the airplane, the 50 caliber and the 20 millimeter cannon was what we had.
Were you learning armaments so specialized that you couldn't work on any other airplane besides the one?
No, sir. No, believe it or not, back then, once you learned the circuitry, how to track your circuitry and stuff and whatnot and all for your bomb racks and bomb shackles and things.
It was very standard.
Yeah.
From Lowry Air Force Base, where did they send you?
Home on leave for 30 days and then Korea.
And then straight to Korea?
Straight to Korea.
How did you get to Korea?
I sailed on out of San Francisco. It was called Pittsburgh, California, but it was San Francisco. We sailed under the Golden Gate Bridge, and I went into Yokohama, Japan, and from there they flew us into Korea.
What was your first impression of Korea when you saw it while you were still on the boat?
Well, I wasn't on the boat when I saw. I was on the aircraft when I saw Korea.
Aircraft.
Japan was what I saw, and we got there in the early morning, and they still had had a light rain, and it was misty and everything, and came up on deck, and you could see the lights of the houses and things, and I tell you, it's kind of hard to tell you what you thought. It was, it just seemed like home.
They were our former enemies only 7 years before.
Yeah.
Did you harbor any anger toward Japanese at the time?
No, I didn't. Well, I didn't have that much dealings with the Japanese because we went through the processing camp there, and then they dispersed us into Korea. I was only there 2 days before I was in Korea.
So you didn't have any sightseeing time?
No, sir. In fact, I didn't even get to meet any of the Japanese then. Only when I got to meet the Japanese was when they flew me out of Korea back to the hospital in Japan, and they had the Japanese nurses and things there.
When you flew to Korea, where did you land?
Daegu Air Force Base.
And you got off the airplane, and what did you see?
There was 2 big impressions there. That was the smell of the rice paddies.
What did it smell like?
Human waste.
Ooh.
See, they used the human body waste for fertilizer, and the smell was something else. But a lot of people look at me and they think you're lying. But when I got off of that aircraft and I saw those mountains and things, I was like Patton was at Kasserine Pass. I had been there. It wasn't something new to me. That's the best I can tell you. I cannot give you any other explanation. But I had been there.
Growing up, did you have dreams of warfare, and you involved in it?
Yeah. I dreamed of, how you want to say, being a warrior, a fighter, or whatever.
And now here you are in the battle zone.
In the middle of it, in the battlefield.
How far was the enemy away from the base that day when you arrived? Any clue?
About 40, 50 miles.
So you felt relatively safe behind the line?
Fairly, yes, sir.
When you looked around the Air Force Base, can you describe how many buildings or what they looked like, or how many planes you saw?
Now, when I looked around that air base, we didn't. What I first saw was the tents, of the military and everything. The town itself, Tegu, when I got to see it, it was nothing but a city of cardboard shanties and shacks that they had built from the rubble and stuff of the war and everything. There wasn't a whole lot to see. And the people, they were poor, they were begging, for anything that they could get.
Well, what was your first night like when you got situated in the camp?
Well, my first night there, it was kind of ironic, because I was in, one of the lowest of the lowliest, being an enlisted man. And when I got there, they had no place for me, no bunk space for me in the enlisted men's tent. So they put me in with the sergeants. And being with a bunch of sergeants, what are you doing in here, boy? So, but after I got to know them and everything, they were a great bunch of fellows. They treated me just like one of their own.
You were still really young. Were they?
Yes, sir.
Were they young also?
Some of them were. But some of them were old World War II vets that were there, and they called me the kid. I'd come in and they'd say, "Well, how's it going today, kid? Well, what do you think of this place now that you've been here a while?" So, but really and truly, when I got there, we didn't have a whole lot of time to camaraderie. I mean, everybody was busy doing a job.
Who became your best friend while you were in Korea?
There was one fellow I still keep in touch with him. His name is Ken Kohler. He lives in Duck, West Virginia.
What did you and him, how did you all meet? And
Just working together on the flight line, I guess you'd say, because he was crew chief on the aircraft, and I was armor. He was doing the job that I kind of wanted to do, and that was, to be the crew be the crew chief and whatnot. But
so he was supervising you at the same time?
no, he didn't supervise me. He was the one that was actually responsible for the engine, the maintenance, and whatnot. And my responsibility was for the armament. Each one of us had a specific job that we had to do.
Were there any people that you were in charge of?
No.
But you got assignments to do jobs?
Yes, sir.
How did you get at these assignments? Were they did come on paper, or were they just orders given orally?
Well, in the ammo shack, we called it the ammo shack, they had all of the aircraft by numbers. And so each armor had so many aircraft assigned to them. And I had 2 assigned to me.
Were they the same 2 all the time?
Yes.
Were the planes flown by the same pilots each time?
No. Now it was ironic because majority of the time, when I say no, because the pilots would, what do you want to call it, rotate off? You know what I mean? Maybe today the pilot would fly and he'd fly in the morning, and in the afternoon they had another pilot that would fly if we had the pilots.
Your buddy Ken, was he in charge of the 2 airplanes that you were armoring?
No, he had the same 2 that I did.
Did y'all name those airplanes?
No, I can't. We had numbers on them. We had like 288 and 320 and stuff like that. That's how we went by them.
Was it the same 2 airplanes the entire time you were there?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Now, a couple of the other men there, they lost their planes. In fact, one boy lost both of his planes the same day.
Can you describe what type of airplanes these were?
These were the F-84 Saberjet. Thunderjets. And the thrust on the F-84 Thunderjet wasn't real great. So when we put a full load of armament systems on them, full load of ammunition, 2,000-pound bombs, and 4 or 5-inch rockets, we had to hang 4 JADO bottles on them. That's jettison the system takeoff.
What's that mean?
It's it helps to, it gives them a thrust when they're taking off. In other words, when they start down the runway, then they ignite these JADO bottles, and it gives them extra thrust to get off the ground. And the burn on those JADO bottles lasted anywhere from, I'd say, a minute to a minute and a half.
Could you describe a typical bomb loading procedure?
Yes.
And were you working all by yourself?
No, we worked.
Okay.
We all worked together. Even though I had 2. Now, when we were loading bombs and everything, all of the armament, all of the fellows would work together. And we had one fella that drove the cherry picker, and that's a 3/4 ton truck with a boom on the front. And you'd hook the bombs and take them off of the dollies, off of the bomb trailer, and put them on these little dollies, and then you'd roll the dolly under the aircraft, and you jack it up and hook it on the shackle, and then you'd have 4 bolts, sway braces they called them, and you'd tighten them down so the bomb wouldn't move and shake while it was in flight. And then when we'd get them all loaded, we'd go back and put fuses in them, and we had various type fuses depending upon the missions that the planes were going on. Some of them were fuses that once they got within 50 feet of the ground, they would go. Others were impact fuses. Some of them were a delayed fuse. They would hit the ground, and it would take them, say, 5-10 minutes before they go, because they were waiting for the enemy to, try to converge on them or whatever, and then they would explode. So
you put these fuses on after they were on the airplane already?
yes. Mm-hmm. You'd screw the fuses in. You had two fuses. You had a nose fuse and a tail fuse. And then you had arming wires that went up into the shackle. And you'd run them into the fuse and put a clip on it, like this. And when they dropped the bomb, then that clip would strip off, and then it would arm the bomb.
How did you know which fuse to put on?
Pinpoint mission. That came from the flight. In other words, flight operations. In other words, they'd get the call as to what kind of support that we had to give to the troops on the front.
And would you be given a piece of paper that says, "This is what I want today"?
No. Well, the armament shack probably got it, but we was told verbally.
Okay.
And I tell you, the one thing that I was a little leery of, well, when I say leery of, was the napalm, the jelly gasoline bombs. You've seen those, how when they go, you know. But and the rockets, when we'd hang the rockets, you had to be careful to make sure that you didn't have any static electricity when you plugged those in.
By the time you arrived, and by the time you did your first arming job, how many days did you have? Practice?
Same day.
Same day. You got off the airplane. By the end of the
Got
day,
off
you
the
were
airplane,
loading?
dropped all of my stuff in that tent, and was carried to the flight line, and went to work.
Were there any other airplanes besides the Thunderjets at the base that you saw?
We had some F-80s and some of the P-51s, and the P-51s was flown by the South Korean pilots.
Did you talk to any of the South Koreans?
No, sir.
Was it
They were on a separate section of the base.
Could you wander around the base at your
Didn't
own
have
way?
time to wander around the base. When I first got there, our F-84s, they didn't have a man that was familiar with the harmonization. That was the bore sight for the guns and whatnot. And I had just come out of Lowry Air Force Base, Colorado, and so at night when the planes were on the ground, that was my job. I was out on the bore sight range, and we had two pits. We call them pits. They'd pull the planes in and jack them up on 3 jack stands and level them up, and then the target was 1,000 yards away, and we'd bore sight those guns according to the PIP, what they call it PIP, the sight on the aircraft. And so while my first couple of weeks there, I worked both night and day. That's why I said when I'd get to talk to the old sergeants and the tent, they wanted to know how the kid was doing, because I didn't get to see him that often.
How was the food on base?
I'll be honest with you, I don't understand our young men today. They complain about the food and everything. I thought we had good food. I was very pleased with it. And
You think it was better than what you were getting at home?
it was, well, let's put it this way. Being a country boy, I ate anything that was prepared and put for me. So I really had no problem with the food that they fed us.
Was those first weeks you were there just day in, day out, nothing special happened, just constant work?
Constant work, yes, sir.
Was there any accidents that occurred on the base?
Or there was one day, from, like I told you about the rockets, one of the guys plugged one of them in, and it went off, and it killed him. It burned him from here. He was standing behind it, you know. We call it a pigtail. You stick it in, and you have to turn it to lock it in place. And when he stuck it in there and went to turn it, I guess it had enough static electricity or a spark or something. But anyway, it went off.
How close were you to him when this occurred?
I was
Close
about 6 or 8 planes away from him.
So you're close enough to hear it and see it.
Yes, sir.
Was that the first person you saw die?
Yeah.
How did it affect you?
It wasn't easy. I think what got me worse than anything else was I did get to go into town one night, and there was a body. I don't know if one of our trucks had hit it or what, but anyway, there was a body laying on the road, and nobody paid attention to it. I mean, you know, it was just laying there, and everybody just kept going by it. Nobody stopped to pick it up or anything.
It looked like a civilian body?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Korean. After that incident of the rocket going off, did you
I was apprehensive, yes.
take more precautions, act slower, or?
Well, yeah, I guess you'd say we used to, well, what they, after that we were told you'd take a screwdriver and stick it in the rocket and do that to get the static electricity out of it before you plug the pigtail into it.
Who was your officer in charge of you?
You know, I don't remember. Not on that.
How about your commanding sergeant or whoever was in charge of you? You recall their names?
Hayes.
Hayes?
Hayes. Sergeant Hayes.
Was he fair?
He was. When I got seen, like I said, we were just, everybody was doing jobs. I mean, everybody worked together. Nobody had any animosities or anything that, you know.
Was there anybody on the job that you thought was incompetent and ought to be kicked out?
No. Because I learned from the men that had been there. I mean, I was the young man on the block, and I learned from them of what to do and how to do.
Did any entertainers ever come and give shows at your base?
Yes. I had Marilyn Monroe over there, and I got within, I guess you'd say about 6 or 8 feet of her. And that was quite a thrill. You know how all the young men are, everybody's in love with them. But that's pretty much, she was the main one that I remember.
Giving a big show at the time?
Yeah.
Singing and dancing?
Yeah.
How many folks were at the show, would you guess? Hundreds or more like thousands?
Oh, no. I'd say we probably maybe had 500 or 600.
Let's stop there and change tapes. Those first weeks at the base were just work.
Yes, sir.
What did you do for relaxation after you got into a settled routine?
Sleep. Because like I told you, when I got there, the planes that we had were in such, they needed harmonization, and I worked at night, and whenever I got an opportunity, I slept.
How many different times did you have to load bombs on the same airplane per day?
It depends upon how far, what the mission was, how far away it was. About 3.
So you could load the same airplane with
Three times,
three
yes.
times in a day for 3 missions. Was there times of lengthy no flights and
When it was when the front was socked in, rainy, whatnot.
what did you do on those days when you didn't have to load?
Bore sight,
Bore sight.
because rain didn't stop you from doing that.
You mentioned loading bombs, but how about the bullets and the cannon shells?
Each gun on an F-84 took about 300 rounds, which was 3 cans of ammo, because each can of ammo took about
Could hold 100 rounds.
100 rounds, yeah.
What was the procedure for loading bullets?
Well, now that, talk about the bullets, no, it depends upon some of our ammo, about every 5th round was a tracer, or maybe every 10 rounds was a tracer. Some was API, armored piercing incendiary. Some was armored piercing. Some was just what we call ball. In other words, if they were supporting troops or strafing the front lines, we used ball ammo. And if we were after tanks or something like that, we'd use armored piercing. And then if we were going after storage tanks or something like that, we'd use armored piercing incendiary to try to start fires.
You were given orders to put certain
Yes, sir.
rounds on there.
We would tell. We was told. Well, that was just like the fuses on the bombs. In other words, it depended upon the mission as to what ammo we'd put on.
Did you meet any of the pilots?
Yes. Oh, yeah. We some of them were. Some of the pilots was friendly. Some of them, I don't know if it was the fact that they were a little leery of making friends because they didn't know just when they might not come back or what, or if some of them were just their personalities and whatnot. They figured they was a little bit better than we were because they were officers. But as a whole, most of them were a pretty good bunch of fellas.
Do you recall the names of any of them that you were closest to?
Now, I had one fellow there. His name was Patton. And he and I got to be pretty good friends because when he was second lieutenant, and when he made his first lieutenant, or vice versa, whichever it was, but when he got his promotion, I got to pin his new bar on him. And I got his old bar here somewhere. I don't know where it is, but he gave me his old gold bar.
Was he older than you?
Not a whole lot.
Not a whole lot.
He was about 22, 23.
When you were over there and you loaded your bombs and your bullets on your airplane and the pilot took off, was there any time that your pilot didn't come back?
No, I was fortunate. I didn't lose one.
Did you ever have an airplane come back that had been shot up?
Yes.
And I realize you weren't in charge of fixing it, but can you describe some of the battle damage?
It had holes in the fuselage and the wing. They were about like that. And I tell you the truth, I guess those jet engines, they were lucky when they got fuselage damage that the round didn't go into the turbines, because see, if a round goes into that turbine and hits those, we call them buckets, the blades, and hit those, see, it knocks it out of balance and you'd have lost an aircraft. Or in the wings, the hydraulic systems, it depends upon whether they hit the hydraulic tank or not, whether they would lose all of their hydraulic fuel and what.
Was there any specific day that you can recall there on the base where it was most hectic because of a series of missions?
There was a few of those that, as fast as we could get them down and refuel them and reload them, they were back up.
Did the offensive by the North Koreans and the Chinese ever get close to the base?
Not while I was there. No, sir.
Can you recall what happened on October 13th?
We had got our orders, or whatever you want to call it, for the mission the next day, and we was putting the bombs on and
At nighttime.
at night, getting the planes ready for the early morning mission, because we'd take off before daylight a lot of times. Our pilots would, so they'd be over the target area by daybreak.
Were you doing all this in the dark?
By truck lights, or flashlights.
So it wasn't like the whole base was illuminated?
No.
And what happened that night?
Myself and one of the other fellows, we were fusing the bombs, and some of the rest of the fellows was hanging them, and I had fused 2 planes, if I remember right, and I was working on the 3rd one, and I looked back and I saw a shadow on the plane that I had just finished, and I hollered, and I told him, I said, "Hey, I just finished that one," and when I did, everything broke loose.
Explain what you mean by that.
They started firing at us, and through, I guess it was a grenade. I don't know if it was a concussion grenade or whatnot, but it exploded right at me, and I got shrapnel, and that's when they picked me up and carried me into the medical tent area, whatever you want to call it.
Were you armed at the time?
I had a carbine with me. I didn't fire around because I guess I was, what do you want to call it, caught off guard, too scared, too shocked.
Did you usually load airplanes with and were being armed? Or
Yeah, we carried our weapons with us, yes.
did they get in the way when you did your job?
It was inconvenient. I mean, you'd have to lay it down and everything. That may have been the reason I never fired a shot, because I was, like I told you, I was putting in fuses, and I probably had the weapon laying on the ground, maybe on the opposite. I don't remember. I can't tell you.
By the time you saw that shadow and then you getting wounded by the grenade, how long was that?
Oh, I don't know, maybe
Seconds or minutes?
maybe a minute and a half, something like that. Because everything just broke loose.
You saw bullets flying all over the place?
Yeah.
Who was firing the bullets, do you think?
The guerrillas. Well, we was too. I mean, some of our fellows. I mean, we were firing back like I told you though. When that grenade went off, it was a long time before I could hear you, but I couldn't hear you.
Where were you standing when the grenade went off? Near the airplane or far
I was under it.
Under the airplane?
I was underneath the airplane.
Did it damage the airplane any?
I'll tell you the truth, I don't know. Because I never got back out on the flight line after that.
Where were you wounded in?
I got it in my hand and in my stomach.
Fragments all through and through?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you were picked up, you said. Do you recall who picked you up?
One of the other fellows. I mean, one of the men that I was working with. Well, when I say picked up, I guess I don't know if I was on my feet. You know what I mean? Or if I was actually on the ground. Because I tell you what I can remember. I can remember being back in the tent, or the they called it infirmary or whatever it was. But anyway, being there, and one of the corpsmen said, "Well, we're gonna have to take him into Tegu to the hospital." And I don't know if I just didn't want to hear or whatever, but anyway, the next thing that I can definitely remember was being in that hospital in Tegu.
Was it a modern hospital?
It was like a MASH unit, and the doctor, he was a young doctor, and a nurse there, and they were prepping me for to operate on me.
How long was these operations?
Be honest with you, I don't know, because the next thing that I can really recall was the next morning, and I was on a ward with all kinds of boys, all kinds of wounds and things.
Did you find out what happened to the base?
No, I never talked to anyone from that outfit from that day till now. I've never talked to anyone.
You were sent back to Japan after being wounded, right?
Yes, sir.
How long was it before you got back to Japan? Was it
3 days.
3 days.
3 days.
And you spent some time in Japan?
I spent. I got there. I guess it was the 16th or 18th of October, and I stayed down till after the first of the year.
So you were in there a month or so?
Yeah, I was there over Christmas. I remember that. They operated on me in Japan twice. And then that's when they decided to send me back to the States.
How'd you get back to the States?
I was area vac.
Were you sitting in an airplane seat, or were you on some type of stretcher?
I could have sat in a seat, but they had me on a stretcher. And when we got to Hickam Air Force Base, Hawaii, we got in there about 10 o'clock at night. And so the next morning, they were servicing the aircraft for us to come on back to the States. And they came through and asked if anybody wanted to take a quick bus trip of Hawaii, see Diamond Head and the Punch Bowl. And so I got up and went and got on the bus and took that tour. And when I got back, the nurse was looking for me. Because, see, I was litter. I wasn't supposed to be ambulatory, as they called it. And got a little bit of trouble over that, but it was too late then. I had done it. So then they flew us into Travis Air Force Base, California. And I was there 2 days. I got to call my mom and talk with her. And then that's when I found out where I was going to be going to. And they said I was going to Sampson Air Force Base, New York. And so when we left there, coming across, it was a big snowstorm here on the East Coast, and I was supposed to land at Rochester, New York. Well, we couldn't land, so I wound up going all the way up to Westover, Massachusetts before they could get us on the ground. And so they sent an ambulance all the way up there and picked me up and brought me back down to Sampson Air Force Base, New York.
What did you do at Sampson?
Well, I stayed in the hospital there off and on for 8 months. And when I got out of the hospital, that's when I went to the 360 maintenance squadron. And I worked on the firing range. That was Sampson Air Force Base was like Lackland. It was a training base. And I worked on the firing range. I repaired the carbines and things for the trainees that was firing on the firing range.
So you weren't loading bombs anymore?
No, sir. And
was it light duty versus what you were doing?
yes, very light duty. I enjoyed being there. When we wasn't on the firing range, because training the troops, they didn't have a range open every day, so there was a lot of days. There was I call it dead time. We played cards, we did anything to kill the time of day, and so they sent me up to the clothing, where they issued the clothing for the new recruits and things, and where they were doing alterations and things. I ripped shirts apart, pants apart, take thread out and everything, and learn how to do sewing.
So again, more light duty.
More light duty. That's what I did the whole time I was there at Sampson. There was no heavy duty there. And while I was there, me and the master sergeant didn't get along very well.
Did you get a chance to go home at any time?
I did. Well, when I was in the hospital, that 8 months I was in the hospital, I went home on 2 30-day convalescent leaves. So I was 2 months out of that 8 that I was home on leave between operations.
Can you describe how people treated you when you were home as a wounded vet?
Yeah, they were all glad to see me. They treated me well. I never will forget this little fella, about like my little grandson. He took me as mentor, I guess, and we was in church one Sunday morning, and he was sitting there, and I had just had my hand operated on and still had scar tissue and stuff, and he was squeezing it, but a little fella, and I did like that, and he said, "Kick, kick." And we both got to laughing, so I had to get up and walk over to church, because every time I'd look at that little fella, he would just cackle. So that was a great honor to have a little fella look up to you as my mentor.
Did anybody treat you as a veteran poorly?
No, I will say I did not get the treatment that the Vietnam boys got when they came back. Although I didn't get, I don't think, the treatment that the World War II vets got. But I was never mistreated or never, called anything other than I don't know whether you'd say a hero, but a
soldier.
Soldier. Mm-hmm.
You had gone back to Sampson Air Force Base, and you were getting better and better as the time went on. What happened to you to get you transferred away from Sampson?
That was when I got into it with this master sergeant. His name was Harrison. And he and I don't know, we just didn't have good chemistry. And so I volunteered. I wanted to go to Europe. And I never could. I guess they just didn't have any need for armament men in Europe. So they said they had an opening in Korea. And I said, well, I'll take it.
So you had the option?
I had the option, yes, sir.
Of staying at Sampson or
staying at Sampson or going back to Korea. And so they put me on orders to go back to Korea. And this lieutenant at headquarters called me up there, and to get to call the headquarters building, yeah, that shook me up. I was scared. I didn't know what I was in for. So when I got up there, the lieutenant asked me, he says, who's trying to railroad you? And I said, I don't understand. He said, well, you on a set of orders to go back to Korea. He says, you know you don't have to go. You just got back here. And I told him I had volunteered. And he says, well, why? And I told him, he says, well, I can take care of that for you if you want to stay here. And I said, well, I'd like to go. He said, well, you're going to have to sign a waiver. So I signed the waiver to go back to Korea. But when I got back to Korea, I was writing to one of my buddies of Sampson. And he told me, he said, hey, guess where Harrison is? He's up in Alaska. That lieutenant had shipped his butt up. So both of us was gone from Sampson.
Did you get any additional training when you went to Korea the second time?
No, sir, did not.
Where were you stationed that time?
That time I was stationed at, to make this story ironic, I went over the second time on the same ship that I went over on the first time, the USS Gordon. And but when I got there, I was stationed at K-13 Suwon Air Base right south of Seoul. And that was with the 8th Fighter Bomber Wing, 35th Fighter Bomber Squadron. And we had the new F-86 Sabre jets.
The F-86.
Yes.
What was your job that time?
I was armament man. I didn't have to have any additional training, but the aircraft was, it was a newer plane, a different plane, and I did have to learn a little bit on the system of it, you know, the gun bay, and but the bomb racks and all was identical, or just same as they were on the F-84s. But the gun bay used what they call a pneumatic. It was air gun charger. So I had to. It took me, I guess, maybe an hour, 2 hours to learn that, and that was it.
Was there? Was the war still going on when you got there the second time?
No.
When
no,
did
it had just ended?
Do you recall when you got there?
Let's see. I got there. The war had ended in what was it? July of '53. I think I got there in March of '54 when I went back.
And the war was over.
Yes, sir.
Did you have to load bombs again?
Yes. Yeah, we still loaded bombs because they were still training. We loaded bombs, we loaded ammo, and we used to stand ready alert because of the threat. Because they were still, when I say hostilities, I mean they were still up on the DMZ. You know, we were still shooting at each other somewhat, not that much, you know, across the DMZ, and we used to stand alerts. We used to have 2, 4, 6, 8 aircraft at the end of the runway, and with the pilot, the crew chief, and the armament men all down there, and we'd get scrambles on an average of 2 to 3 times a week. And when we got a scramble, we would have those aircraft in the air within 2 minutes.
So was the pace of life different the second time versus first time?
Yes, sir. Much different.
More relaxed? Or
more relaxed,
more
yes.
Relaxed?
More relaxed. Except when you were on alert. Everybody had to See, we stood a 24-hour alert with those aircraft on the end of the runway. We'd stand 8-hour shifts.
And when you say stand, were you sitting beside the airplane?
Yeah, we were there. I mean, the pilot, well, they had a little shack there, or whatever, that the pilots were in. The armament and the crew chief, we'd either sit in there with them or we'd stay, but we were all right there within a few feet of the aircraft. And what we'd do when we'd get an alert, when the siren would go off, the crew chief went up on top of the plane and straddled the canopy, and the pilot jumped in. He helped him fasten his chute, pulled the pins out of the ejection seat. I would start the APU unit, that's our auxiliary power unit, for the plane so the pilot could start. And while the crew chief was fastening the pilot's chute and everything, the pilot was starting the aircraft because by the time they got there, I had the APU unit running, had power on the aircraft. And once I got the APU unit started, I'd go around and pull all of the pins. We had a little flag about this long on all of the safety pins, and I'd pull those, and we'd have that aircraft ready to take off, and they would be airborne within 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Could you describe K-13 versus the other base you were on?
We had a perimeter. We had the Army had quad 50 in gun emplacements all the way around the base, and we had fences with the stockade fences with the woven wire and everything, and you had to be checked in and out. I mean, we didn't, but the what did they call the Koreans that worked on base?
Civilian workers?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they had to be checked in and out and everything.
Was that different types of security than K2?
Much so. At K2, the MP is when you'd go in and out of the gate, everybody was shook down. In other words, if when you went out the gate, you had to.
Well, at K-13 it wasn't that way.
No.
Were there any incidences that happened at K-13?
No. Other than, we had a couple planes. I got a picture over there of an F-94. Now they were the light interceptors. They had a 2-man crew. One was pilot and the other one was the radar. And I got some pictures of one of those when he came back. His nose wheel collapsed and he caught on fire. And when he finished skidding on that runway, the pilot went out one side and the navigator went out on the other side. And then we had one of our planes was on the gunnery range, and he picked up a ricochet and knocked the canopy off, and he got cut on the side of his face with the glass or plexiglass when it went off. But we didn't have any real big. Wait a minute, I did have one. We had one night. We had an F-94 on takeoff, crashed inside of a mountain, and we lost the pilot and the navigator or the radar operator And I saw that. The plane took off, he went out, and he made a bank and went like that. And I don't know whether he lost power or what, but just a big explosion. He hit the side of the mountain. And the siren went off, and they sent out the rescue helicopter. It had the base chaplain and the base surgeon on it and the chopper crew. So we lost 8 men now within about 15 minutes.
Because the chopper went down too?
The chopper lost the blade, rotary blade, and went down. So we lost 8 men now within about a 15-minute period.
Was there anything on the airplanes that went defective because they were used, like guns freezing up or melting down?
Yes, we had to use a gun heater, and if the gun heater went defective, the guns would freeze up, and the pilot had no armament system on it. But that happened very rarely. On occasion, we'd lose maybe one gun at a time, but never all 6 of them. But we did have one time that the electrical system froze up.
Can you tell me about what's happening in this picture?
All right, now this picture right here. This was that's how we'd load the ammunition. Down below is a door that you drop down, and you'd stick 6 ammo cans in here, and then you'd bring the ammo up and feed it into the gun here. Now this is that pneumatic gun charger right here that I had to learn on that plane when I went back. And but that's how we armed those planes.
You mentioned once a little bit ago about one man who melted his guns down.
Now that was Lieutenant Donahue. They were on a patrol. That was in May of 1954, and they were on patrol, and they were jumped by a bunch of MiGs, and he was in a dogfight in the plane that he was on. He burnt the guns up, and we called him One Burst Donahue because he never let off of the trigger. He expended all of his rounds on that one aircraft. You could see bits and pieces on his gun camera. You could see bits and pieces of the MiG flying off, but he could never get a confirmed kill for it. So we only got confirmed 2 kills and 1 probable. And we called him One Burst Donahue.
You also mentioned that your airplanes got into a fight after the war was over.
Yes, sir. That was the after the Armistice had been signed, and that was the last. To my knowledge, it was the last MiG that was shot down by an F-86 Sabrejet.
Was that shot down months after the thing, or right after the?
About 8 to 10 months.
So
after.
the war was over.
Yes, sir.
Did you help load the bombs and bullets on that airplane?
Well, we didn't carry any bombs on that particular mission. We just carried the ammo.
Was it anticipated that there would be a dogfight?
No, sir. No. It was supposed to have been just a regular routine reconnaissance.
So you didn't see it occur, did you?
No, sir. I got to see the film of the gun cameras afterwards, and I got to listen to, in the Radio Shack, I got to listen to the dogfight on the pilots.
Right.
On the radio, because we were tuned in to their frequency.
Were you told not to speak about it?
Yes.
How did you learn the details about the entire incident?
I didn't until just recently, and I wrote to Maxwell Air Force Base and requested a copy. I was trying to get a copy of the number, the plane number. In other words, the planes were identified by a number like 322, 250, and whatnot, because I wanted to write a story on it. But the report that I got back from Maxwell Air Force Base didn't have the plane number, so I wasn't able to properly identify the aircraft. But I do have pictures, and I'd never thought to take a picture of the plane identification number. I got pictures of the gun bay pulling the guns out that Donahue had burned up and replacing the barrels and some of the receivers and things on it. But I never thought to get the plane identification.
Were any of these pictures that you took, was it restricted space to take pictures on base?
It was and it wasn't, because as you know, the young GIs, they can do just about anything that they want to, and we got pictures.
So it wasn't supposed to be happening, but you did.
No, sir.
I see. How long did you stay at K-13?
I was there 6 months, and then they moved my whole wing, the 8th Fighter Bomber Wing, which is 3 squadrons, the 35th, 36th, and 80th Fighter Bomber Squadrons. We moved to Itazuki Air Force Base, Japan.
Itazuki?
Mm-hmm.
Why did they do that?
I don't know why they moved the whole wing out of there. I think was they were rotating another wing in there, I believe, was the reason why they did it, but I'm not sure.
How long did you stay in Itazuki?
I stayed there for a year, and I played football on the Itazuki Green Wave Air Force football team.
Did your wounds ever affect your movement or your abilities?
I wound up in the hospital at Itazuki. I had some stomach problems, and I spent 30 days in the hospital there recuperating. But as for my hand and all, no. Just as Mother Nature and Father Time has treated me, the hand, as you can see, his arthritis has set in and stuff. So in the stomach, I still have some problems with it, but not bad.
After you were left Itazuki, where did you go?
Came back to the States and was home on leave and was supposed to report to Eglin Field, Florida. And while I was home on leave, I got a set of orders to report to Aberdeen Provence Ground, Maryland. And that's where I was discharged from in January 1956.
Had you had enough of the Air Force by that time?
Well, I had an opportunity to re-enlist, and most of the fellows that I had gone into service with in 1952 had made staff sergeant, and I was still airman second. So when I got ready to get out, they asked me if I'd re-enlist, and I said, if you give me staff, well, we can't give you staff, but we'll give you airman first. I said, I can't re-enlist. So that's why I got out.
You wanted promotion, but they weren't willing to give it.
That's right. Not as high as I wanted to go.
So you came home?
I came home. And I went to work for Melpar Incorporated. It was a government contractor there in Arlington. And then I worked for them almost a year. And then I started driving buses for DC Transit in Washington. And I drove buses for them for 2 years.
How long was it before you found your wife?
Well, my first wife I married in 1958. I met her while driving streetcars in Washington, D.C. And we were married 42 years. And my wife now, we met downtown at the Senior Citizens Center. It was her first night there and mine. And I don't know, I think the good Lord was looking out for me, because the first wife and this one both came out of the same pod. I couldn't ask for two better women.
Your life after the war, did you have any problems with mentally because of your experience?
Not really. I had a couple flashbacks, but no, sir, not really. I would say this to any young man that going in the military: I wouldn't give you $5 to go back and do it again, but I wouldn't take $1 million from my experiences.
Have you been to the Korean War Memorial?
I have, and this one I want to tell you. I was fortunate. I belonged to the VFW 3103 here in Fredericksburg, and so I got my VFW magazine, and they had a page in there in October of 2002. If you were interested in going back to the 50th anniversary of the signing of the armistice of the Korean War, sign up, fill out this. So I filled out this page, and it was in October, and I mailed it in. And I didn't hear anything up until March of 2003. And then one day I went to the mailbox and I got this envelope, says Department of the Army. And I said, well, now wait a minute. I don't think I am young enough to have to worry about that. So I opened it up, and I was one of 400 out of 6,000 that was selected to go back to Korea for the 50th anniversary of the signing of the armistice. And I got a medal and everything presented to me by the Korean government, which I'm very proud of.
Did you go to Seoul for that?
I did. And Seoul, when I left there, was a city of cardboard shanties and shacks and ruins. And now, in 2003, it's a city of 2 million people. And the old people that remembered us treated us like we were treated when we were over there before, kings. But the young ones are kind of like our young ones. They had just soon not be bothered.
During your time in the service, did you carry any good luck charm of any sort?
Not really. I did have a picture of my youngest sister that I carried with me, and when I was in the hospital there in Japan, somebody stole it, and but no, the only thing that I carried, and I still have it now, that I really cherish, and that's my dog tag.
Do you recall any particularly humorous or unusual event?
I'm trying to think. We had some good times and everything, and I guess the one night that a bunch of us fellows in Japan now went downtown Itazuki Air Force Base, outside of Itazuki, and we were in a bar there drinking, and we got pretty well polluted, and so part of the town was off limits. And I says, damn if I ain't going over and find out why. So we went over there, and I found out why it was off limits, because that's where all the officers were. And I don't know, I guess just typical young man, GI and whatnot, we wanted to prove that we could get in there and get out without getting in trouble. And so that's what we did.
Did you see any other people get wounded or injured on the
No, sir. I didn't see them. But when I was in the hospital there at Japan, I recall I was ambulatory, and I was in the ward there one day, and this young fella called me over, and he had a big tent over the foot of his bed. And he told me, he said, hey, buddy, said, would you mind coming over here and tucking that blanket in? My feet are cold. And he didn't have any feet.
How did you see the Vietnam veterans treated when you're an ex-military man? Here it is in 1960.
I'll tell you, I respect the Vietnam boys, and I feel sorry for them. I don't think our VFW has treated them kindly, because when they came back, a lot of the VFWs, I wasn't a member of the VFW at the time, but a lot of the VFWs didn't want anything to do with them. They wouldn't let them in. The Vietnam boys, I think, deserve as much or more respect than I did as a Korean vet.
Do you think the memorials downtown D.C. were properly designed for Vietnam vet, Korean vet, World War II vet?
Yes. I think they were, all of them were long overdue. I am glad that the Vietnam veterans got theirs when they did, because of the way they were treated. It took us a while to get ours, and it took even longer for the World War II vets to get theirs. I haven't been to the World War II memorial yet, but in September we are having an Air Force reunion at Crystal City of the 8th Fighter Bomber Group, and we are planning on going to the World War II Memorial Museum. Now, last year when I went to the reunion, we was at Wright Pat Air Force Base, and it was most impressive. I think that any man that enjoys airplanes, military, anything, should, if he can, get to go to Wright Pat and see all of those, because they've got 4 hangars there, and they are broke down into World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Cold War, and the beginning, the old World War, the old beginning of the Air Force. And then they got to one hangar that if you go there, you have to get there early to get your name on the roster. It's a secure area because it has the presidential aircraft that Truman, Kennedy, Eisenhower, and let's see, Truman, Kennedy, Eisenhower, Roosevelt flew on. And that is most impressive.
In about 3 hours, my son's going to be listening to your little spiel here. He's 11 years old. What advice do you give him?
I think for a young man that he sounds like he might have been me at that age. I was very enthralled with the military, and to learn and to give it your all. Be which all you can be, and enjoy life, because it's short.
Is there anything else I should ask you about?
No, I guess that just about covers it. I have enjoyed this interview, and I am glad to know that there's someone that cares.
Thank you,
And I
sir.
thank you.
Thank you, sir.